Everyone. Thanks for tuning in to episode 12 of Takeaways. My name is Patrick Searsey. I'm the Director of Marketing for ALN Apartment Data, and I'm joined by the star of the show, Senior Market Analyst Jordan Brooks. Jordan, how are you?
I'm great, Patrick. How about you?
I'm doing very well. I just wanted to remind our audience before we get into all of this that this is ALN's 30th anniversary. And we want to thank all of our clients, all of our friends and family for the support over the years. And we've got a short post about it over on our blog at alndata.com/blog. And this is episode 12, which means that we've been at this for a full year. And what a journey that has been, hasn't it, Jordan?
It's been a Lord of the Rings-esque type of journey, maybe you would say.
just about. Uh, well, there certainly has been a lot of movement this year for the multifamily industry, and I can't wait to hear what you have to add to the article that we're talking about today, which is called "Rent Growth: How Much Is Too Much." So, if you would tell us about the national picture first and what that looks like.
Sure. Well, at the national level, really more than 190,000 new units have been delivered in the first half of 2021, which is about a 40% increase from what we saw in 2020, and a pretty good increase from 2019 as well. And throughout most of the newsletter, for the most part, we compared mid-year 2021 to mid-year 2019, just because of all the noise in the numbers from COVID impacted 2020. So as we go through this, if I start quoting 2019 numbers for our viewers, that's why. But so almost 200,000 new units at the midway point of the year, and then net absorption was about 330,000 units, which was just well beyond anything in our numbers going back as far as we've been collecting nationwide data. The closest thing I saw was the first half of 2018. We had net absorption of about 210,000 units. And again, that was the closest to this year. Just to kind of give an idea of how dazzling the demand numbers have been this year. I mean, just really, historical type of numbers in terms of demand. And then on the rent growth front, we've seen about 6% average effective rent growth, which again, in a good year, kind of mid-decade, last decade would be an annual number. And that's, 6% in 6 months. And then, for average occupancy, we saw a little over a 1% gain up to 93%. So, strong rent growth, high occupancy, and demand really not seen in at least a decade, if not more.
In your article, you talked both about multifamily performance in market size and in price class. What's the major takeaways for each of those?
Well, in terms of market size, just to remind viewers of this, we've done a newsletter topic, I believe, on market tiers, but we at ALN, we divide every market across the United States into one of 4 tiers based on the size of its multifamily presence, with tier 1 markets being the largest 33 markets in the country for multifamily. And so one of the sections in the newsletter dealt with differences in performance by market size. And what we really saw there was that the larger markets have really overperformed the most in terms of apartment demand so far this year. So there I'm talking about the tier 1 and the tier 2 markets, kind of the primary markets, and then some of the larger secondary markets, essentially. And for tier 1 markets, for those largest markets, we saw apartment demand about 67% higher than in 2019 during the same portion of 2019. And then the tier 2 markets, the overperformance was even more extreme. We saw a 75% increase in net absorption compared to the first half of 2019. So, from a demand perspective, there's really been a large upswell in those kind of larger markets. That's not to say the smaller markets, the secondary, tertiary markets haven't had strong years as well, but the biggest overperformance was definitely with the larger markets. And then from the perspective of price class, kind of the same thing. It's the Class A and Class B subsets are really where we're seeing kind of the most dazzling numbers. For Class A properties, net absorption was up about 67% compared to the first half of 2019. And then Class B was up over 90%. So just really, really massive increases in demand. And like I said, it's not as if, as with the market size, with price class, it's not as if Class C and Class D properties aren't seeing increases in demand as well. They are. It's just on a percentage basis, they weren't quite as large as those Class A and Class B numbers.
Well, you mentioned a few specific markets in your article. Talk to us about what you're seeing there with those markets.
In the newsletter, we talked about Florida specifically as a state, because if you look at the top 15 markets by average effective rent growth through June, 7 of those are in Florida. So it was very well represented at the top of the list. We also, though, talked about markets like Boise, Phoenix, and Austin. Each of those three have added at least 11% to average effective rent, again, at the mid-year point. But beyond that, almost 2 dozen markets, it was about 20 markets, gained at least 10% in average effective rent through June. And then if you switch that to net rent, which takes into account the rent and the occupancy, it was closer to 30 markets that
That's
added
incredible.
10% or more. Yeah, just
Yeah.
numbers that we've really not seen.
No. Well, that's really incredible. Any other further takeaways that you have from your article this month?
Well, one note, and kind of where the title of the newsletter came from, is particularly in the Class C space, there's been more than 5% rent growth through June. And so, when we're talking about kind of eye-popping rent numbers in the Class A space or in certain markets, that's kind of one aspect. But when we're talking about, an annual number for rent growth in a 6-month period for more workforce type housing, that's when we start getting into kind of the double-edged sword nature of strong rent growth, which is at some point it does start having a negative impact on affordability. And so one of the takeaways mentioned in the newsletter was that Class C rent growth specifically bears watching as we go through the second half of the year, because it's at some point, rent growth continuing on that type of trajectory is going to create some further affordability issues for the Class C segment.
Well, it's certainly something to keep an eye on. Well, speaking of keeping an eye on, I know a few of the things that you've got coming up, but why don't you share with us and the audience here what do you got coming up next?
Well, I'll be doing a short presentation, kind of a general overview of national numbers on August 16th at the Apartment Innovation and Marketing Conference. That's virtual. And registration information will, I'm assuming, be on our social media channels. Patrick usually takes care of all that for us. And I'll also be moderating a panel discussion at the upcoming NAA conference at the end of August. So for those of you that will be attending the conference, definitely come check that out. It'll be a great discussion, and some of the topics we'll be talking about were touched on this newsletter. So that'll be a good session. And then in terms of our blog, we've got a piece coming up in the next day or two that's going to be looking at multifamily construction times and what we've been seeing there recently, and kind of what we're seeing regionally and things like that.
Well, if you're looking for how you can register for some of these events, if you're looking for general news from our company or just news around the industry, you can follow us on our social media channels, Twitter at ALN APT Data. You can search for ALN Apartment Data on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Don't forget, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell. The little button just came up. That way you're always notified of the latest videos and content that we've put out. Jordan, thank you so much for a full year of takeaways. I've really enjoyed this series with you, and I can't wait till next month till we start year 2, season 2, if you will. And we'll talk then.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Patrick.